Hello, it's Cheryl here. I decided the other day that I would make a worm farm, and I decided to make it on the cheap. I collected some ice cream containers that were around the yard that often had dog food in them or something like that, and I collected all the ingredients. Now I started off with 3 ice cream containers, one larger than the others. Then I had a hole punch, a hammer, some soil, food scraps, nothing too acid, newspaper, worms and water. I had to punch holes in the bottom of the containers, and I used a little hole punch or a screwdriver or something like that, and the holes were way too small. They just wouldn't allow enough draining. I realised I had to use something else to make the holes bigger. So I used an old pair of pliers, which was sort of the only thing I could find, straight nose pliers. The only problem with that is that as you pushed in, it caused the plastic to get a little lip, and this can cause the water to not drain through. If you get some food, like I had a bit of rice that went all gluggy, it blocked up the holes and the worms couldn't move through. Now these holes, when you fill them up, the water goes down through the food and through the worm castings or worm poo, and it washes down into the bottom container, the blue container, which is the deeper one. See, the yellow one will sit inside of that one. And as the worms run out of food, they crawl up through the holes to the next layer that has the food in it. Once they digest that, you swap the containers around and put fresh food in the top again. Now, once I had finished putting holes in the first of the middle layers, the yellow ice cream container, I then had to put holes in the pink layer. The first layer, the blue one, has water, which is leaked down through it. The yellow layer has the worms. Then the pink layer has the food for them, or your food scraps. Now, I had to put holes in both of them, so that took quite a while. And I realised later on that there really weren't enough holes because the worms took a while to get up there, and the holes blocked off a little bit with food. So I needed a lot of bigger holes. Professional ones have mesh. Now the worms, they were left over from my son's fishing trip. They didn't catch anything. I decided to give the worms a bit of a home. I tipped them into the middle container and let them stay there. Now, it was said that they had a little bit of food in there. The idea is that once they've eaten that food, they will move up. Now, to put the next container on top, which is the same size, it will sink right down to the soil and the worms. So I put some little pieces of stone and bark just to raise the level up so they wouldn't get squashed, and then I'd sit the next one on. I put in the leaves and dirt and food scraps, things like potato peels and apple cores, and spread them around nicely for the worms. Now, in the tutorials it said to line the top with a little bit of paper. I had some serviettes lying around left over from barbecue, and I dampened them and sat them in top. And then I shredded some newspaper and dampened that and placed it in top as well. Apparently the worms will eat that as well, especially if it's wet. It will break down. Now, after I put the shredded paper in, I placed some wet material, dampened material. That's just an old piece of my husband's pyjamas, winter pyjamas that were cut up for rags. I soaked that in some water and placed it in on top of the worms, and that's supposed to keep the moisture in because the worms like moist, wet soil and they don't want to dry out, and it helps with the food rotting as well. So I tucked that in the top, and then I put the lid on. Now the lid has to have holes too. You can keep pouring a little bit of water onto the top of it to keep them moist. You don't need as many holes in the lid, but it needs it to aerate it. It does also let other things in, like I did find that I had a few maggots, which was a bit unpleasant, and it gets a bit smelly. Perhaps I shouldn't have it just near my back door, but I'm a bit lazy. I didn't want to walk very far with it. I wrote my name on the container to make sure that nobody took it to give it to the dogs. I didn't want the dogs or the chooks eating my worms. Now, I did lose some of the worms, I must confess, but the worms that survived are very big and fat and wet. So I think with more holes in it and more water, very, very hot our summer has been, I think that it would be classed as a success. So why don't you have a go at making a cheap worm farm? Let me know if it works out for you. You don't have to use ice cream containers. You can use whatever you can find. Anyway, that's it for this little film. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.